Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating, highly partisan political narrative. We're going to look at a specific piece of commentary that claims the global democratic establishment just suffered a string of devastating, world-altering defeats. Now, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, seeing exactly how these sweeping narratives are built is a literal masterclass in modern media. So let's jump right in.
Right off the bat, the source kicks things off with this exact quote from Barack Obama. They're using this as a deliberate hook to accuse the former president of massive hypocrisy regarding Donald Trump back in 2016. By starting right here, the commentary immediately casts Obama not just as a former leader, but as the central architect of a manufactured political machine that is allegedly crumbling right before our eyes. So, here is the roadmap for how they make this argument. The source builds its entire case on three specific pillars: the UK Labour Party losses, US redistricting reversals, and the messaging gap.
Let's dive right into pillar number one, the UK elections and the Labour Party stumble. To set the stage for this global stumble, the commentary points across the pond. They argue that the UK Labour Party is essentially the brains behind the American Democratic Party. And to prove that this brain is failing, well, they flash this pretty staggering number on the screen: 1,800. They claim Labour just suffered an absolute bloodbath, losing roughly 1,800 local races and their entire grip on Wales and Scotland. So what's to blame for this massive loss? Well, the source explicitly points the finger at what it labels globalist policies and says they're totally alienating working-class voters. Look at how they connect the dots here. They directly blame the pursuit of net zero green energy for soaring costs of living. They tie open borders to rising crime, and they link a permanent war stance in Ukraine to global energy disruptions. The author is essentially taking high-level geopolitical policy and hooking it straight into the everyday frustrations of the working-class voter. And the contrast they paint here is absolutely stark. On the left side, you've got Keir Starmer, who they dismiss as a synthetic, laboratory-grown politician, supposedly mentored by Obama to fake his authenticity. Meanwhile, on the right, Nigel Farage is held up as this raw, authentic populist who is surging precisely because he fights back against those exact globalist policies. All right, moving on to pillar 2, U.S. redistricting, specifically looking at map rulings in Virginia and Louisiana. Now the source brings the battle back home to the U.S., laying out a really aggressive timeline in Virginia. They claim that after voters approved a bipartisan redistricting commission in 2020, Democratic operatives pulled an illegal fast track in April to bypass it entirely. But as you can see, by May, the Virginia Supreme Court struck it down in a 4-3 decision. The source frames this whole thing not just as a standard court ruling, but almost like a foiled heist. Now, check out the math the source uses to back up this heist claim, because it's striking. They argue the rejected map was this aggressive gerrymander designed to instantly wipe out 4 Republican seats. That would have shifted Virginia from a relatively competitive 6-5 split right into an overwhelming 10-1 Democratic monopoly. Stopping this, they argue, effectively destroyed a master plan to secure the U.S. House. But they don't stop at Virginia. To make this look like a true national revolution, the source links that state-level defeat with the Louisiana versus Callais Supreme Court decision, which they claim officially outlawed race-based gerrymandering nationwide. By stringing these local and federal rulings together, the commentator weaves this narrative of a massive, irreversible shift in midterm momentum away from the Democrats. Which brings us to our third and final pillar, messaging styles, pitting authentic outsiders against manufactured politicians. Here, the video establishes a very rigid black and white duality for us. On one hand, you have the manufactured aristocracy. These are highly polished politicians relying entirely on expensive consultants and legacy media. And then on the other hand, you have the authentic outsiders, raw truth-tellers who bypass traditional media entirely so they can tap directly into the everyday realities of the public. To hammer this point home, they point to a specific speech by J.D. Vance at an Iowa steel grill factory. Instead of using focus-grouped corporate talking points, they point out how Vance leaned heavily into the real pain of lost manufacturing jobs. He even pulled a famous line from the movie Saving Private Ryan, "Earn this," to discuss military sacrifice. They're arguing that this visceral emotion connects with voters' souls in a way that synthetic politicians literally cannot replicate. Then the narrative takes a really interesting pivot to a hyper-local race with a very modern twist. They highlight Spencer Pratt's run for LA mayor. According to the source, Pratt is bypassing the traditional political infrastructure entirely. Instead, he's relying on viral,
30-second AI-generated videos to relentlessly attack the political establishment over very visceral, street-level issues like crime and homelessness.
This specific quote really hits the nail on the head for their grand thesis. A guy who lost his house is doing more damage than 100 million of consultants. It is a bold claim, right? The idea that raw, unfiltered realities, even if they're whipped up by two guys and an AI tool, will absolutely dismantle massive, polished political machines every single time.
Okay, let's wrap this up with the conclusion and the ultimate takeaway. So, the commentator works hard to weave all these totally separate, geographically isolated events into one giant declaration of total political victory. They conclude that the U.S. midterm map has permanently shifted, the globalist British operation is collapsing, and the era of the manufactured politician is officially dead. You have to admit, it is a masterclass in connecting disparate dots into a single, unified theory of political warfare.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for all of us as consumers of information. How do we spot the difference between someone objectively reporting the news and someone carefully constructing a grand partisan narrative? Seeing the blueprint, how commentators stacks an overseas election next to a local court ruling to claim a global revolution, is absolutely crucial for our media literacy today. We have to keep asking questions about the media we consume. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.